Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today we are talking about something that I get a lot of questions about, and that is picky eating. My guest today is family nutritionist Jen House. And we're going to dive into a bit of a case study along with some best practices for the picky eaters in your family and for your family mealtime struggles. We're going to look at a case study of a client of mine who has 4 little kids. They're small for their ages, and she really worries about them being too picky and being a short order cook, and nighttime just feels like such a struggle. Every mealtime feels like a struggle to get them to eat. So I brought my client's issues and dilemma to Jen, and we're going to talk about that. So let's dive in and meet Jen. Jennifer has been a registered dietitian for 16 years. She's owned First Step Nutrition for the past 13 years, where she helps to make feeding families easier with a focus on baby-led weaning and picky eating. Jennifer has published 2 books and regularly appears in the media. She earned her BSc in Nutrition and Food Science from the University of Alberta, and before starting First Step Nutrition, she completed an MSc in Human Nutrition from the University of British Columbia. She's also worked at the Alberta Children's Hospital in outpatient services, often seeing clients with failure to thrive or picky eating struggles. Having a picky eater of her own, Jennifer can relate to the stress and struggles of raising a kid who just won't try new foods. She's helped hundreds of families implement Ellyn Satter's division of responsibility of feeding in their homes with personal consults and team feeding consults in partnership with an occupational therapist. She now works with clients online in a group coaching program to support them in making mealtimes more peaceful with a picky eater at the table. So let's dive in and meet Jen and hear about what she recommends for my client and what the best practices are for you if you have a picky eater or even if you have power struggles over food. Just a quick favor before we dive in. I would love it if you could just do me 2 quick things. One is if you would leave a review either on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. That would be amazing. We love those 5-star reviews and any details you want to include about why you love the podcast. And I would also love it if you could share this podcast with a friend or on social media. We would love to reach more people and spread the word about peaceful parenting and really just help out more families. So thank you so much for any shares or any reviews that you might be able to leave us today. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. And I got the best email. Well, not the best email. I got an email from my client yesterday, which is the best because it's perfect timing for our podcast together. So I'm hoping that we can just start off. I'm going to read you this email that I got from my client, and I think it's just going to be a beautiful way to jump into our topic today of picky eating. So my client says she's, just gotten home. She's starting to get dinner on the table. Of course, the girls they always say, I don't like this and barely eat anything. It's so frustrating. Can't just one time they eat dinner without complaining about anything. We try to be accommodating and let them eat raw veggies or peanut butter, but after a while, it's just irritating. Then as soon as dinner's done, they say, I'm hungry and can you get me something to eat? Which is even more irritating. I ended up peeling 4 oranges for the girls. And by the way, the girls are 5, 7, and 9. She said, L ate rice last night, wouldn't eat any veggies or meat. O ate a little rice. C ate green beans and rice. The girls are all small for their ages, like 20 to 30th percentile. I'm worried they're not going to grow correctly if they don't get the nutrition they need. It's a struggle to meet the standards for fruits, veggies, dairy, and protein every day. What can we do about the dinner situation? It's an every night occurrence. I want them to at least try the food before they say they don't like it. Is that reasonable? I also don't want them to eat peanut butter and jelly 2 times a day.
You're right. This is a perfect case study. And I know this mom is frustrated. She sounds anxious, and she's definitely not alone. We all want to raise healthy kids, right? And I would never say that parents create picky eating, but certain things that they do can help to make it worse or better. And there's a lot this mom can do to make meal times easier for both herself and for her kids. But first, I think before jumping into some of those tips, it's important to address some of her worries and her concerns about her kids' growth as well as their nutrition. So she mentions the girls are small for their age, 20th to 30th percentile. So when I hear that, I, would want to look at their growth charts. Have they always been on the 20th to 30th percentile? Are the parents small? Often we have unrealistic expectations and think that, well, our kids should be on the 50th percentile. That's the goal. And it's really not. It just means 50% of kids will be above the 50th percentile and 50% will be below. So if the girls, are growing along the percentiles, then there's no concern about weight, no concern about growth. So that might help make her feel a little bit better. And then in terms of nutrition, so sure, the kids might be meeting their calorie needs because they're growing. Nutrition is certainly, another topic in and of itself. But again, it's often not as difficult to meet kids' nutrition needs as parents think. They often have large expectations here as well. So, for example, I find parents are often concerned about protein, worried their kids aren't getting enough protein. But protein doesn't just come from meat. It comes from dairy, it comes from whole grains. And if you write down your kids' food intake for a couple days, I find it helps parents to see, okay, well, they actually are eating more than 5 foods. They have a decent variety here. And looking over the course of a couple days or a week, rather than meal by meal, as we tend to judge their intake, I find most kids will really get what they need.
I remember when my kids were little, I heard the tip to look at what a toddler eats over the course of a week rather than over a course of the day.
Exactly. And that can take a lot of pressure off of parents because kids' appetites go up and down like crazy. A couple days in a row, they might not eat anything and then they'll make up for it the next few days, depending on if they're growing a lot, if they're teething, if they're tired, if they're sick. So we expect kids to eat 3 meals a day, all food on their plates like we do, but that's not intuitive for them, right? It's not natural for them. So we can expect that it's normal for their appetites to go up and down.
Yeah, and just another point on the anxiety, sometimes I'll ask parents, because even though this is not my field of expertise, it certainly does come up a lot, right? The mealtime struggles. I'll say, well, was your doctor concerned? And a lot of times they'll say, no. And I find that's a good reality check too, right? Like maybe this mom is, she's worried because they're on the 20th or 30th and they're not eating 3 meals a day, like you said. But if your doctor's not concerned, if your doctor's looking at, their growth curve and their, between checkups, I think that can make parents feel a lot better and take away some of that anxiety that they're feeling about eating.
Exactly. Because when they're worried about growth, then what happens is they pressure their kids to eat more. And we know from a lot of research and experience that that just tends to totally backfire and the kids end up eating less. So if we can take away some of the anxiety, like, okay, maybe they are meeting their nutrition needs, maybe they are growing well, then it's easier for parents to relax.
Right. Okay. So step one, try not to be anxious about their food intake or whether they're growing enough, if they're on their curve and your doctor's not concerned. And also taking away that daily day-to-day, well, they didn't have any protein today. Well, maybe they had like protein yesterday, or maybe they're having protein in other ways that you're not realizing. So taking away the anxiety, would you say that's kind of a step one piece?
Yeah, I think that will just make the rest of the pieces a lot easier for parents to implement if they don't have that, underlying stress and anxiety.
Okay, great. So where would you go next with this question?
I think there's a lot that this family can do in terms of implementing the division of responsibility in
Okay,
feeding.
so tell us what that is.
Yeah, so this was a feeding concept. It's created by Ellyn, who's also a dietitian. And parents have certain roles in feeding, and kids have certain roles in eating. And if you're able to follow your roles as a caregiver and trust your children to follow their roles, then there will be far fewer picky eating battles. Your kids will be far more likely to grow up with, a healthy body image, a healthy relationship around food. So in terms of the parents' roles or caregivers' roles, you're responsible for what the child is offered to eat. So, generally the family meals without bringing up backup food or being that short order cook. You can certainly have, one food on the table that each child, can comfortably eat, but we don't want to be making different meals for every kid, which can, sometimes happen.
The goal here is not for the child to go hungry, right? Like we don't want people going hungry, and that's why you have the safe food.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, for kids who only eat a small number of foods, you definitely need to provide one or two safe foods for them, whether it's rice, whether it's cucumbers. So, in this family's instance, she said we let them eat raw veggies or peanut butter. So, we want the safe food to be part of the meal, something everybody's consuming, not just something special that's there for this child. But the raw veggies is a platter in the middle of the table that anyone can eat. And maybe for your picky eater that they're always comfortable eating that and they don't have to get stressed and anxious about seeing a plate full of food that they don't recognize and don't want to eat in front of them.
Okay. So the first part of the parent's role is what? And I know there's another part.
Yes, there are two more parts. So the second part is when. So this is a more structured meal and snack times rather than the constant snacking throughout the day, which kids tend to prefer if they, get to control this role. So if you do have the meal and snack times with about depends on kids and your schedule, about 2 hours between, the child has a chance to build up an appetite for their meal. And then they're not like the mom who wrote to you said they're asking for a snack right after dinner, right? And that's going to happen if you don't have some of these boundaries in place because snack time's different. You're not at the table. There's no pressure. Often the foods are fun or easier to eat. So kids will always prefer snack. But in that case, the answer would be no, we just had dinner snacks in 90 minutes and you can eat then
Do
so
you
that they don't
recommend
hold on.
a bedtime snack?
Yeah, I think it depends on, maybe the age of the kid, what time you have dinner, what time you go to bed. But generally, I think bedtime snack is a good thing. It gives the kids, another chance to get in some nutrition right before going to bed. And it doesn't have to be the dinner that they refused earlier. It doesn't have to be all the fun foods. Remember, you're in charge of what they eat. But as long as you're offering like two different food groups, nothing super exciting, it's another chance for them to get in a little bit of food, especially if they're not a big dinner eater, which is
We used
normal.
to have cereal for like,
Mhm.
like not very sweet granola and yogurt for bedtime snack. That was a good one when my kids were little.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And then the third role for the parent is where the child eats. So ideally, at the family table, we know as kids grow up, there's huge benefits to having regular family meals from not only eating better nutrition, but doing better in school, having healthier relationships, less risk of alcohol, drug use. So starting from a young age is awesome to have family meals. And for the younger ones too, we really need to consider their chair at the table. So we need them to be supported, including having a footrest. So I see young kids on adult chairs, and it's very uncomfortable for them to sit and to eat. So that's why they're not eating, and that's why they're getting up and down from the table. So that's one really simple fix around where kids are eating. And so those are the parents' roles.
In terms of the family meal, I know sometimes parents get home late and kids are hungry earlier. Like, what do you do when there's a mismatch in terms of, kids are ready to eat dinner at 5:30 because they have to get ready for bed at 7, but maybe dad or mom isn't coming home until later. Do you have any ideas or solutions for that?
Yeah, and family dinners don't, or family meals don't have to be dinner or the evening meal. It can be whenever it fits best into your schedule. Maybe it's easier for the family to have breakfast together. It doesn't have to be, every day either. So the research shows the benefits will come at around 5 meals a day.
Oh,
5 meals a week,
a
five
week,
meals
yeah.
a week together. Sorry. That doesn't add up, does it? So as long as you're able to pick, a couple meals during the week to sit down, even if it's just on the weekend or a couple breakfasts during the week, and that works better for your schedule, that's totally fine too.
I love that 5 meals a week because honestly, like our family has a very hard time finding times when we're all together for family meals with everyone's schedules.
Especially when they get older, right? Into those
Yeah.
activities or have
Yeah.
jobs and
Yeah.
their own life.
Okay, so the parent's responsibility and the division of responsibility is what the children are offered to eat, when they're offered the food, and where they eat it. That's the parent's responsibility. What about the kid's responsibility?
So the kid's responsibility is pretty simple. It's only if they eat of the foods that you've offered them, at the regular meal and snack times, if they eat it all and how much they're going to eat. And this is really hard for parents to let go of. They want to control how much their child eats. But if we can just, take a step back, put the food on the table and say, okay, my role's done. It's up to my kids. What ends up happening is they actually end up eating generally more food, trying new foods on their own, because when we ask them to please take a bite or, bribe them with dessert or reward them with a sticker chart. I know I've heard you talking a lot about, intrinsic, extrinsic motivation. We want kids to be intrinsically motivated to eat because they're curious and they're exploring and because they're hungry, not
Mm-hmm.
because they get a sticker or they want to please their parent. That sounds a lot easier than I know it is for a lot of parents, but we really have to trust that our kids can listen to their appetites and know how much they need to eat.
I think it was about 2 years ago, there was a very large study that came out that actually looked exactly at what you're talking about. And I think parents always feel better when they know that this is research backed. This isn't just like Jen's and my idea of what we should be doing. But I remember the research showed they compared two groups of parents, one group that encouraged them kids to try, on the spectrum from pressuring to encouraging kids to try foods and to eat more, and the other who didn't. And what they found was the group, the pressuring parents, their children were way pickier at the end of the study than the group of parents whose children were not pressured to try things and to eat.
Absolutely. So there's lots of research showing that when we pressure our kids to eat more, they experience early satiety, so they're not as hungry. And that's likely because of the stress hormones that are going on when, they feel like they're pressured to do something at the table. So they become anxious, they're not hungry anymore, they're eating less, they're weighing less, and they're pickier. And there was another study that showed families who followed the division of responsibility, their kids actually have a more nutritious diet, not a less nutritious diet, like we're probably worried about, if we trust our kids to follow their roles. So it ends up being a win-win for everyone.
Can you talk just briefly about, I had somebody who pointed out who's in my membership group, pointed out that the division of responsibility was intuitive eating. Like a lot of people and a lot of grown-ups who are following intuitive eating are having to relearn how to eat intuitively because they didn't, their intuitive sense of their bodies wasn't respected when they were children. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. So a lot of parents are not intuitive eaters, as adults. Many of us are not. So then it becomes difficult for us to be able to trust our kids because if we don't feel like we can trust our own bodies and our own intuition when it comes to eating, how can we trust our, 3-year-old around that? So I think that's an important point in that sometimes as the caregivers will need to do a little bit of their own work with their relationship with food and their relationship with their body so that they can be a good role model and deal with their children in different ways and perhaps, they different from how they were raised.
And so for a child, like children are, as from what I understand, they're born with a sense of knowing what their bodies need in terms of nutrition, in terms of the amounts of food that they eat. And that's sort of what intuitive eating is, right?
Yeah, and there are some special cases where the child might have some kind of medical issue or oral motor or sensory issue where it's actually difficult for them to eat or pain can override hunger, for example. But in the vast majority of kids, they're really good at knowing how much they eat and they're naturally intuitive eaters for sure.
I hope we're not getting too off track here, but this is just really interesting to me. How do you tell the difference between a kid who has actually some challenges, like sensory challenges or some of the things that you just said, versus we're in a power struggle and they're a picky eater?
Yeah, it definitely requires a full assessment and sometimes a referral to other healthcare providers, whether it's, an occupational therapist or speech language pathologist. But there are, lots of signs for all of these reasons for picky eating. For like oral motor, for example, if your child doesn't eat any real meat, not like processed chicken fingers, but real meat or hard fruits or vegetables, maybe it's because they have difficulty chewing it. If, they gag a lot when they eat, if food falls out of their mouth a lot when they eat, they may have physical difficulty eating food. Some kids have a tongue tie that wasn't addressed, and if they had difficulty breastfeeding, it also affects how they eat. So those are some signs that it might be difficult for a kid to eat, and I would refer to an occupational therapist at that point. Sensory wise is also a fascinating area. So there are 8 different senses, and eating is uses them all. So it's basically, one of the most difficult sensory tasks that we do. So if your kid hates having their teeth brushed, they hate getting dirty, they'll only eat, certain textures or temperatures, may find they're really sensitive to noise or to light, they might be sensory sensitive. And there are lots of signs for that. And there are lots of activities that we can do to help kind of desensitize them in the certain areas that they have trouble with.
Yeah, I know my assistant Corey mentioned her son has sensory processing disorder, and they used a brush to brush his mouth, I guess, or his gums in his mouth to help him become less sensitive to the food because he actually had a lot of trouble chewing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's a method of feeding called sequential oral sensory, or SOS, from Kay Toomey, and she has a 32-step hierarchy for eating. Some kids just can't go in there and eat it. They have to first of all learn how to tolerate the food on the table, and
Mm.
then they have to learn, how to touch it. And then they have to learn how to lick it, right? And then maybe they'll chew and spit it out. So there can be a lot of steps for some of these kids who are sensory sensitive to learn how to eat. It's not as simple as we think it should be.
Well, all the things you mentioned sound like normal toddler eating, right? They smell it, they touch it, they
Mhm.
play with it, they push it around on their high
Yeah.
chair, they squish it. And so that sounds like those are just kids who intuitively know how to learn how to eat by doing all experimenting with their food in that way.
Yeah, exactly. And rather than thinking, oh, my kid didn't eat anything, he just played with his food, just knowing that your kid actually learned a lot at that meal, right? And it's part of the process in learning how to eat, then we don't have to feel as discouraged.
I love that. Playing with your food is a good thing.
Yeah, it is totally. It's a little bit messy, but it does have a purpose. Play with a purpose.
So let's get back to our family. What are some other tips that you would give this mom who's just having such a hard time at dinner?
So she talks a lot about being irritated by the kids complaining, or saying yuck or I don't want this. So one thing she could put in place is some table rules. And one rule I would have is the kids aren't allowed to say yuck, right? It's like offensive to the mom. It's rude to the chef. So they can say no, thank you, right? Like they don't have to take the food. They don't have to make negative comments about it. It's fine. But then from the parents' end too, they also cannot ask their children to take bites. They can't, roll their eyes if the kid passes the veggies or make any signs of they're pressuring their kids. So those are kind of some table rules from both the parents and both the kids that'll probably make things a little bit, more pleasant at mealtime.
I love that you just said that because I always think the most important thing about a family meal is that it's a warm experience. And so you said two things that come in the way of the warm experience, the parents nagging and pressuring the kids and the kids complaining about the food. So both of those off the table, hopefully it can be a nicer experience for everyone.
Exactly. We want the table to be an area where kids want to come and parents want to come, and where we can create some good memories and connection, as opposed to it being a battleground like it is for so many families. So if we're able to, have some of those table rules, take the focus off of the food, right? It's not about how much everybody's eating. It's about connecting. So you might have some ideas for this too, but we'd like to go around and share like our highs and lows from the day, right? So everybody gets a chance to talk about their day. And I'm not, nagging at my kids to eat more broccoli. And it's
Right.
much better for everyone.
Right. I love that. Do you have any suggestions? I get this question a lot. What's a reasonable amount of time to expect a child to sit at the table? So you get the 3-year-olds who, they want to sit for 5 minutes and have 3 bites and then they want to leave the table. Do you have any guidelines around that?
Yeah, so when I hear this, the first thing I want to look at is the child's chair to make sure it is supportive and comfortable for them at the table. For a 3-year-old, I would say 5 minutes is probably enough. And some people would like set a timer, like a visual timer that the child can see, and say, you don't have to eat, but please come to the table to talk to us or for dinner time. So they don't, again, associate the table with somewhere that they have to come and they're forced to eat. They can just come and hang out for a couple minutes. If they don't want to eat, fine, then they can go.
I love that. And then they wait until the next snack time, the next scheduled snack time to eat.
Exactly. They don't get to come back 10 minutes later asking for a snack.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess, what do you think if the rest of the family's still eating? They could come back though.
Yeah, I think that's okay. I mean, the kids, as we all know, toddlers, they like to be up and down, running around. And that's not like super safe while you're eating from a choking hazard. But I think that's a good guideline. If you want to get down after a couple minutes and go play and everybody's still at the table eating, and then you want to come back for a few more bites, that's okay. But once the food is off the table, kind of mealtime is over, and then they're waiting for snack time with just water in between.
Right. I love the invitation to just join us at the table. You don't have to eat, but come and sit with us. We want to hear about your day. We want to hear about your high and your low, or whatever. When I was growing up, we used to go around the table and say everything that we liked about the other people at the table. And my sister and I always used to say, "Can we say what we don't like also?" My parents.
That's easier. With your sister, right?
Yeah. Okay, so what else would you suggest to our family here? We've got the division of responsibility, and they might not have realized it, but they did have this their safe food with the veggies, and it sounds like rice. I think all the girls ate the rice. And do you have any other tips for them?
Yeah, I think something else that really helps with kids, it would be great for all of our kids, age 9, 7, and 5, are to get them involved. So they can, pick a meal for the week and add it to the meal plan, or they can set the table, or they can wash the lettuce. Especially for the younger ones, getting them involved just gives them a sense of ownership and pride in that. And they'll be more willing to give that food a try as opposed to something that's just, plated in front of them. And then another tip is to try family style meals. So, what happens when we pre plate food, like put a little bit of each food on everybody's plate and put it in front of them, is they see this food, they don't want to eat most of it. And that's when the yuck, I don't like this starts. So, instead, if we can put the food in the middle of the table and the kids can decide what to add to their own plate, again, that gives them a little bit of ownership and control, and it'll just decrease a lot of the complaining and a lot of the stress from the kids. And then remember, the parents have to just kind of relax. If the kid just puts rice on their plate for tonight, that's okay. Just know that by not pressuring them, you're actually giving them a gift, and that it'll be easier and more likely for them to branch out and try those other foods on the table.
Are there any guidelines in terms of time? Like, so say our mom is like, okay, I'm going to give this a try, but by next week, her kids are still only eating rice. Is there a timeline for sort of how long it typically takes for them to be a little bit more willing to try foods or eat other foods?
Well, if it is taking a long time, I think it's a great thing to look at their nutrition or go see a dietitian to see if you can supplement. If supplement is needed, because of course we need them to be getting all their nutrients and growing. But in terms of food and expanding their diet, there really is no timeline. And for some kids, after putting the division of responsibility in place, they'll start trying foods within days. Others might take literally years. But parents don't often see other positive changes. So the end goal isn't just how much variety your kid eats. Other possible outcomes that will happen will be like these more peaceful meals, right? Like maybe there's no more tears at the table. Maybe your kid is easily coming to the table. Maybe you're having more conversation, or the parents feel less stressed. So there's lots of benefits to following the division of responsibility. It may not quickly lead to your child branching out and trying new foods, but there are lots of positive outcomes from it that will be quicker.
I also think that sometimes it's not even about the food. I'm sure you run into that a lot. It's just kids. I mean, nobody likes to be pushed around and bossed around. And when you remove that pressure, they're like, actually, you know what? I don't even mind broccoli. I just don't want to eat it when someone's trying to force me to eat it, or whatever the food is, right? Like, so removing that coerciveness really frees kids to feel like they can choose to try something or eat something if they don't feel like they lose if they try it. Because that's what I always find, like, you have to eat this. I don't want to, and they're inside, they're feeling bossed around. Maybe they wouldn't even mind trying it, but they don't want to, quote, lose the battle, right?
Exactly. And there is some research that shows even in adults, some of us continue to hate foods that we are forced to eat as a child just because we are forced to eat them as a child. And you're right, it just becomes a battle, and picky eaters tend to be stubborn. This is why the one bite rule doesn't work, or the three bite rules for most kids, for stubborn kids, because they're not going to take a bite of that whatever broccoli and say, oh, actually, this is good. I think I'm going to eat more. They're going to take that bite because they're forced to and say, ooh, yuck, that's gross.
Because they don't want to
And
lose.
yeah, exactly. Nobody would like to be in the situation where they're forced to eat something. So
Yeah.
you're right. We don't want to make it a battle, and kids don't want to lose, especially, toddlers and preschoolers.
I did used to say to my kids, and I didn't know about the division of responsibility when they were little, but I would encourage them to try something, but in a very non-coercive way. And I would say, you know what? You never know. It could end up being your favorite thing. But, you don't have to try it. But if you don't try it, you'll never know what it tastes like. And that seemed to work pretty well.
Yeah, I think it depends on the child too, right? If your child isn't seeing that as pressure, then they'll be like, okay, maybe I'll try this. Mom doesn't really care whether I eat it or not. Whereas there's so many ways that we do pressure kids that might even be more subtle than that and don't even realize it. And they think, oh, I know mom really wants to eat this, me to eat
Hmm.
this. So like you're saying, they're not going to because they don't want to lose that battle.
And you're taking me down memory lane here. Another thing that I used to do, which I don't know if you would recommend this or not, but I used to tell them if they tried it and they didn't like it, they could spit it out. Like not in a dramatic spitting it on the table, but like, spit it into a napkin or something. Cause just knowing that you have to commit. I remember the first time I tried oysters, I thought, what if I don't like it? I thought I could always, spit it out if I don't like it, but I did like them.
Yeah, I think that's great. Actually, one of my kids, my daughter was really picky for years. And now she's come out of that and she tries all foods and she enjoys eating, but she knows that if she tries something and she doesn't want to eat it, she goes to the garbage and spits it out, just like you
Hmm.
said. So you don't have to chew and swallow. You can taste it and then, get rid of it if you don't like it.
Yeah, because that could really, I mean, that could stop kids from trying something like, what if I don't like it and then I have to swallow this disgusting thing? And, anyways, I'm glad that that is something that was okay because that's what I did. So, do you have any final, I want to ask you after we're sort of finished talking about the case study, just any tips generally for picky eaters. But is there anything else that you would say to our mom, the mom of these three little girls?
I think if she can figure out how to release that feeling that she needs to get her kids to eat, that it will really help. And it takes practice and you're going to mess up, right? But if you can kind of catch yourself in those, saying those comments to your kids or those feelings and just practice on releasing that and letting your child control the if or how much, it'll really help. Get her kids in the kitchen, maybe having a dietitian look at their food records and supplement if needed might help. If they limit certain food groups from their diet, I find supplements help make parents feel a little bit better too, in terms of letting their kids just eat rice for dinner. And just focus on the kids and not the food,
Hmm.
especially at dinner time. We have these grand expectations that kids should eat all their dinner, and it's very common for kids to eat no dinner, right? Maybe they've had enough to eat during the day or they're tired by then. So yeah, lowering a lot of her expectations will really help too.
Yeah, and I love that. Just the idea to trust, trust that they're not going to starve themselves. They will eat and that they know what their bodies need. I think that's really hard to do as parents. It's sort of back to that anxiety piece again.
Exactly. But it fits in really well with the whole, peaceful parenting, responsive parenting, trusting your kids know they know to follow their own appetite.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so any just general, best practices that we haven't covered so far about picky eating or feeding our children?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about why kids are picky, and I think there's a little more to that. So if there's an underlying cause that we don't address, the division of responsibility probably isn't going to work really well just because it's still, difficult for your child to eat physically. So there's those normal reasons why it's hard for kids to eat, like, changing growth. We talked about decreased appetite a little bit as they turn 1, 2 years old. Their growth slows, their appetite decreases. They're learning how to say no and exerting their independence. So, all those normal developmental reasons that will pass for most kids. And we talked about oral motor concerns, so difficulty with chewing and swallowing, some sensory concerns. So, they're oversensitive or undersensitive to touch, smell, taste, sight. And then there's some physical concerns too. So, with my daughter, I actually realized that she was low in iron when she was age 4. And that's because her hair was really thin and falling out a lot. So I took her for her first blood test, and found out she was low in iron. And low iron is common in picky eaters because they don't eat a lot of, foods. They don't eat a lot of meat, and it leads to poor growth and appetite. So now whenever I come across a picky eater that, has a low iron intake, other signs would be they get sick a lot, they're not growing well, they're pale, they're tired. I would suggest iron blood test. And if it's low, to supplement. And sometimes just that will increase their appetite. Or if they have, constipation, allergies, reflux, sometimes it can hurt for them to eat. So we have to figure out if there's any underlying issue going on and, fix that. But for most kids, it's the normal developmental stuff, and then that broken division of responsibility that I find are almost always present in picky eaters. And sometimes you'll find, a sensory, oral, motor, or physical issue, but for most families, it'll just be learning how to follow those rules.
Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about, I don't know, treats, maybe that's not the right word, but I know that there is within the division of responsibility, from what I've read, it's also you want to include foods like ice cream or cookies or chips.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that and the role of not everyday food? Let's just call it that. Like the role of
Mm-hmm.
food that you don't want to eat every day, but it's still fun to eat and kids love.
That is a big concern and question for all parents. And in terms of what to call it, I just usually call it what it is, right? Like a lot of people call it sweets or treats or fun foods. I would just call it, cookies or cake. In terms of managing this, you're right. Ellyn Satter talks a lot about this as well, the division of responsibility creator. The goal is to create a healthy relationship with these foods, with cakes or cookies or chips, rather than make them the forbidden food, which we know people in general just end up craving anything that's forbidden. So to get around this, I would avoid consoling with cookies or candy, right? If your kid's crying, sure, you can give them a cookie and they'll stop crying, but that's just teaching them to look to those foods for comfort. I would avoid using them as a bribe. It's so common to see parents say, you can have dessert after you finish dinner, or after you eat all your vegetables, or after you try one bite of all these foods, which we talked about the pitfalls of pressure. But this is just telling the child that, these vegetables or dinner is yucky and the dessert is more appealing, right? It's put up on that pedestal, which is not, the mindset that we want to be creating. And another interesting tip or something to try, especially if you find your kid is almost, seems to be obsessed with cookies or sweets, is to serve them with the meal. So you don't have to have dessert every day. It can have some nutritional value, right? Like ice cream actually does. But rather than having it after the meal, where, the kid might hold out for that, the parent might feel some need to get the kids to finish dinner, just serve it right along with the dinner. And what happens once this becomes normal is the kid is going to go back and forth between the dessert and the dinner, and it totally helps to normalize it and put it on an even playing field. And then another thing you can do is during a couple of snacks a week, maybe pick 1 or 2 snacks a week, the child can have unlimited amounts of that sweet, because at dinner time they just get like 1 bowl of ice cream, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around, right? Well, does that really follow the division of responsibility? Aren't kids supposed to choose how much? But we want them to eat something other than ice cream. But we don't also want to make them feel restricted around these sweets. So pick a couple snacks every week, and the kid can have as much cookies as they want, along with the fruit and milk or whatever you offer.
Or
Chips,
yeah.
Whatever they kind of crave and you find that they're always asking for, you can say, no, we're not having, chips with dinner today, but we'll have some tomorrow after school snack. Okay. You can have as much as you want.
Great. I love that. And anything else you feel like we haven't covered that comes up in your practice or in the families that you see that would be helpful for my audience to know about?
I think, The case study really covered so much of it. A lot of the anxiety parents have that they really don't need to have. And then just trusting their kids a little more while putting some of those boundaries in place around, what foods are offered, when they're offered, where they're offered. And if that, you're super concerned about your kids' nutrition intake, you think it's really limited, or you're wondering if they have a sensory or oral motor concerns, it doesn't hurt to seek help earlier, whether it's, a dietitian or an occupational therapist or referral from your doctor, to seek help earlier rather than later, because only about 50% of picky eaters will outgrow it on their own within 2 years. So for some kids, this is really a lasting issue. And the earlier you get the division of responsibility in place, figure out if there's any underlying concerns that are making it hard for them to eat, the easier everybody's life will be.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This has been so helpful, and I know it's going to be really, really helpful for the families in my community. I'm going to ask you the question that I ask all of my guests, and your answer doesn't have to be about nutrition or feeding. If you could go back to your younger parent self, what advice would you give yourself? It can be about nutrition or feeding, but it doesn't have to be.
I think I would tell myself not to listen to everybody's advice, because we know, especially as a young parent, there's so much advice out there from your in-laws, your parents, your friends, the internet, and it becomes really stressful to know what to do. In particular, for me, my challenge with kids was sleep. And I felt like, oh, my friend had her kids sleeping through the night at 3 weeks. Like, maybe I should try that method or this, rather than just focusing on yourself and your baby and your intuition, and their needs. I think that would have made my life so much easier.
I agree with you on that one. None of my kids were good sleepers. And when my second was born, I resolved I'm going to read all the books. I'm going to do, everything that I can to try and make him a good sleeper. And all I did was drive myself crazy. And I'm not actually exaggerating. I was starting to really feel like mentally challenged by this, and not in a good way. I ended up having to just throw out all the books and just, really just look at my child. And, all you can do is provide it's not a podcast about sleep, but you can only really provide the opportunities and the schedule for them to sleep. And it's just like the food. They decide if they're going to sleep and how much.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, following everyone's advice, whether it's sleep or feeding, there's so many conflicting things out there. I feel like even with the feeding, right? You can just trust your kids and stop working so hard at it.
Yeah, I love that. Let it be easy. Could you tell our listeners where they can find out more about you?
Sure. My website is firststepnutrition.com, and my Instagram is at firststepnut. And I also have a free training about how to teach kids to try new foods without struggles at dinner time. And they can access that both on my website or Instagram or at pickyeatingtraining.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
You're welcome. This was fun, Sarah.
I hope you found that episode really helpful. I know that those strategies really work. So many people that I know who have used the division of responsibility have really found that it changes their family's dinner times or all their meal times. So do look up Jen, see what she has to offer. And before you go, just a quick reminder to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And please share this episode with a friend or two, or share it on social media. We would love to be able to reach more people. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.